Today we are going to talk about one of the world's greatest wine grapes and wines. That grape is Riesling. Riesling is absolutely synonymous with Germany, the most famous white wine grape of Germany. There was a certain amount of sweetness to most German wines, and that was the expectation of the public. Historically, German wines, Rieslings, were also dry. Germany put together a system of classification of the grapes. Now, most of the world now is heading into global warming, where the ability to ripen grapes is less of a problem. In Germany, being very cool climate at the time, the ability to ripen grapes was always an issue and was highly dependent on a good vintage. Not surprisingly, therefore, the Germans based their classifications, their quality classifications, on must weight, the specific gravity of the must, the grape juice, before fermentation. Why specific gravity? Because the higher the specific gravity, the higher the sugar content. The higher the sugar content implied a better site, a better year, lower crop levels, in other words, quality. So based on that, Germany's top wines, because leaving aside Deutscher Tafelwein, Deutscher Landwein, Germany's top wines all had some special attribute, called in German a predicate. The predicates go as follows. This is in increasing order of must weight. Kabinett, Spätlese, Auslese, Beerenauslese, Trockenbeerenauslese. So Kabinett, basically the entry level for higher quality. Spätlese, getting towards more of a late harvest style, but not late harvest. Auslese, late harvest. Beerenauslese, late harvest, but where you're working with individual beeren, grape berries. And Trockenbeerenauslese, late harvest made from dried grapes. Those grapes having been dried on the vine and having achieved their dryness and a very unctuous quality.
Like raisin?
From raisinning, but also from being attacked by what the Germans call Edelfowl, what the French call Pourritus noble, and what we in English call noble rot. Those grapes look terrible, by the way. They're brown and fuzzy, but they make unbelievable wine. And remember this, you're talking about the German Trockenbeerenauslese. Probably you can buy a 750, for sure 375, of some of the best for around 300 to 350, maybe a little bit less, euros or dollars. If you think that first of all they're picking these when it's cold already, beyond the end of the season, and secondly that pretty much one guy picking all day makes enough for maybe two, but probably only one bottle.
Whoa.
So it's a hell of a bargain. It's expensive, but it's a hell of a bargain. Mm-hmm. Now there are ways of making similar wines with technology today called cryo extraction. You freeze the grapes. You work on them while they're frozen. You press them when they're frozen, expels the plugs of ice. But you make them the traditional way. First of all, it's about the vineyard. Does it get botrytis? Does it get healthy botrytis? And are the sugar levels high? All the rest of it.
That means Kabinett and blah blah and Trocken something, that means the sweetness, right?
Yes, the sweetness. It means the amount of sugar in the must, in the grape juice before fermentation. Mm-hmm. Now, they are not using these predicates so much anymore, because before you would want a dry wine, but the wine was labeled as Spätlese. And depending on the color of the capsule, at the higher levels, depending on the color of the capsule, if it was gold capsule, you knew it was sweet. But it was not a reliable indication. So what they started to do was they say you wanted a wine fermented to dryness, but made from the level of grapes of Spätlese, so you got a Spätlese Trocken, dry. Not to be confused with Trockenbeerenauslese, because those are extremely sweet, because at that point in time, it's the grape that's dry, not the wine. Whereas Auslese Trocken, Spätlese Trocken, those are dry wines made from grapes, obviously, but the wines are fermented to dryness. More and more today, you are seeing that Germans do not always, in fact, not nearly as much as they used to, specify the predicate level. They know what it is, but they don't specify it anymore. They don't want to mislead people. If they want you to understand that there's some sweetness in the grapes, they'll use the old predicates. In the wine. You see a wine today from Germany and it just says Mosel, it gives you the name of the town, Pisporter, Goldtropfen, Trocken. Kabinett Trocken or Trocken, then you know. So it's just to help the consumers to understand a little bit better.
If I want to find very dry Riesling, which word should I looking for?
It's hard to know. If it says Trocken, Trocken, if it says Trocken, again, like I said, not to be confused with Trockenbier and Auslese.
Yeah.
If it says Riesling Trocken and it doesn't have anything else on it, then you know. Trocken means dry, fermented to dryness. If it doesn't say anything, it's probably dry or tending towards dryness, but at that point in time, if you're in a restaurant, you ask the som. If you're in a liquor store, you ask somebody on the floor. But if you want to know for yourself, Trocken.
Trocken. Okay.
Yeah. Riesling is a grape with very pale skins. So it's one of those grape varieties when you're blind tasting that's got very little color. Of course, grapes get color for all sorts of reasons. If you put them in up, if you ferment on the skins, but you don't with Riesling and they're not much anyway. If they've got very high levels of sugar, particularly if they are made with dried berries. The grape grows arguably best in the Rheingau and in the Mosel. People will fight with me about that. The German Riesling is grown everywhere, Rhine, Hessen, Mittelrhein, the Nahe, and some excellent wines are coming out of those places. What the Moselle is known for is the flinty, slaty character of the wines. Because those wines are grown largely in slate soils. We're going to be tasting two today from the Mosel. One of them is Pisporter Goldtropfen, and those grapes, I picked some of them, are planted in very, very steep slopes, blue slate. And the other one, the Alter Reben, that we'll be drinking, also from the Mosel, red slate, also extremely steep slopes. Once you get the wines into the cellar, there's not all that much to be done. You want to ferment the wines. You don't want to ferment them on the skins. It's not like red wine. With white wine, there are not that many levers to pull. The decisions about white wine are more about the handling. Do you want to put it in old neutral oak or 100% in stainless steel? Do you want to leave residual sugar in it? Other than that, you deal, in most instances, unless you've got problems in the cellar, you deal with what nature has given you. It's a late ripening grape, medium to late, usually later ripening, and it's got quite a long cycle. So it's out there for quite a while. More and more today, personally, I love Riesling. I never used to, perhaps because I found them too sweet. But dry Rieslings today, they really get me exciting. I find them thrilling. One of the things about Riesling is it's naturally very high acidity, as grapes go, so much more than Chardonnay. Sauvignon Blanc is an acidic variety, but more than Sauvignon Blanc, more than Semillon. The other one that's got great acidity, although the acidity sort of manifests itself slightly differently, is Chenin Blanc. And to me, not surprising that Chenin Blanc also makes very beautiful sweet wines on the Loire and in Bordeaux, and is extremely high acidity. Rieslings go well with food, the high acidity. When they're young, they have a marked floral character, like spring flowers almost. And as they age, depending on where they're grown, they get some of the characteristics of gasoline, petrol notes. Now one would say, I wouldn't drink petrol out of my tank. Why would I drink it out of my glass? It's a different kind of thing. Okay, I mean, it's a very, very attractive character, and it's a beautiful character from another perspective. When you've got them in a blind tasting, it's very helpful to point you at Riesling. And Riesling is usually, of all the grapes, one of the most varietally obvious. I don't mean obvious in a bad way, I mean it in a good way. You most of the time know that you're drinking Riesling. Dry Riesling, very much with oysters, raw shellfish. Older Rieslings, perhaps with oily white fish, not because you want it to have oil, but because the acidity of the Riesling slices through the oil. You know, Riesling and slightly off-dry Riesling with chicken or duck, shellfish, cooked shellfish, very versatile.
Is off-dry more dry or the less dry?
Off-dry is less dry.
Less dry.
It's
okay.
just off-dry.
I see.
Arguably the country that has taken Riesling the most seriously outside of Germany and France would be Australia. It's the New World country for me, my go-to New World country for dry Riesling. Now, you can get decent dry Riesling in New Zealand, in South Africa, in Chile, so it's out there. You can get lovely dry Riesling from the Alto Adige in northern Italy. The best Rieslings that I've had in Australia come from the Eden and Clare valleys. I think it's more about the Australians taking a lot of care and attention, and they really like their wines dry. I mean dry.
Okay.
And then moving across to Alsace, Riesling's one of the great grapes of Alsace, but now the Riesling is made always the French way. So with the French concern less about the grape and more about the terroir, hardly ever making a sweet wine unless absolutely intentionally. Some of the great sweet wines of the world are coming out of Alsace, Vendange Tardive and Vin de Grain Noble. So wines made from nobly rotted grapes and Vendange Tardive, late harvest. Fellow MW Olivier Umbrecht makes wine at Zint Umbrecht, a family property, and he does some sweet wines. Really, really beautiful stuff. So yeah, it's also a place for sweet wine, but today we're talking about dry wine. Today's dry wine was sourced from a Lieu-dit. You guys know what a Lieu-dit is?
No.
Lieu-dit is a named vineyard. So it doesn't have a French appellation like Grand Cru. This is the Lieu-dit Altenburg, which is just below a Grand Cru vineyard, close to the foothills of the Vosges Mountains. Limestone, marl soils, but a very famous Lieu-dit. Many producers make wine from Altenburg. So Altenburg is just a cut above any regular vineyard, but not Grand Cru. And we have one of those today.
So two of those are Mosel,
Two of them are Mosel.
and one's Alsace, one's from Australia.
Right.
How can I differentiate it?
The Australian wine, it's likely to be very, very dry and a little bit more focused than the others. After that, the Moselle will be more focused, and there'll be more going on, sort of more complexities that are not quite absolutely as piercing as the German wines and the Australian wine. For the Moselle wines, they are 2021. 21 was, fortunately, one of the cooler vintages of the last few, so you got a very high acid vintage on those.
So Australia Riesling, very dry, focused, and the German, complexity.
They will be complex, I guess, the lightest on entry. Somewhat stony, somewhat flinty, and the ones that sort of the most lightweight in the best way on the palate.
I see. And how can I figure out it's the Alsace Riesling?
So I think the Alsace wine, we'll see, will likely have more things going on. It will not be as absolutely easy to identify as the other three, but you will sure see that it is Riesling, but more going on in the way that it was made, not necessarily better, just different. Okay,
let's start.
Okay.
You finished?
Yep.
You like him?
I like them all. Basically, those are all delicious, so I can't help drinking.
So the question then is, they're all delicious. Did they all have something that you can relate to, varietal character? Does it feel to you like they're all made from the same grape?
Yeah, petrol.
Okay, all right.
And very high acid.
Very high acid. That's the grape and the winemaking and the vintage in one case, two cases, but not unbalanced acid. Very high acid that likes food and things like that. Based on the discussion we had about the little pointers that I gave you, tell me what you thought.
Okay, for number one, the color is the lightest color. On the nose, I got petrol and lemon in it. And on the palate, high acid, I got stone fruit in it. And I wrote Alsace for the first one.
You wrote Alsace. Interesting, okay. In this particular case, I didn't mention it. One of the classic descriptors for Australian Riesling is lime.
But I said lemon.
No, lemon, lime.
You should have told Australia wine has lime.
I should have. You are right. You are right. I forgot to say that.
Okay.
Naughty me. Yeah, you are right.
Number two, color. Darker than number one. And on the nose, it was a little heavier than number one. And has a petrol too. And on the palate, high acid too. It has very high acid, so almost felt like a fizz. And it was oily. Maybe Alsace? No, German.
You've only got German left now, so yeah. Of the two Germans, one's going to be slightly sweeter than the other one. Which one was this one?
It's a dry one.
The drier, okay.
Yeah.
So this is going to be then the Histon Alterreben 2021. Histon is the name I gave it.
Uh-huh.
Do you know why?
Just the name. I don't know. I don't know the meaning is.
You don't speak German.
I don't.
Histon means to cough, which is my name.
Oh.
Peter Cough.
What is the meaning of the cough?
My cough, it's my name.
Ah.
선생님 이름이 커피니까.
And
That's
Histon
fine.
is cough in German. And this is the dry one. It's the Alterreben. The grapes here are over 50 years old. Some of them are over 70 years old.
Number 3. It was darker than number 2.
Yeah, darker than any of them.
Yes. On the nose, it was heavier than number 2. How should I explain it? Heavier.
Tell me in Korean.
무겁다.
무겁다? It weighs more on the nose. Does
Yeah.
it make sense?
Okay, it weighs more on the nose. Smells sweeter than the last one. On the palate, definitely sweeter. High acid. It has lemon and stone fruit. Maybe German.
This is not sweeter. You need to go back and taste this.
What? It was
This
sweet.
is not sweet. You see, I told you before you started that it's a more complex in the way it's made, in the way it presents itself. It's a French wine, the way the French do things, versus the others. So in many ways it's got more body, but it's not sweet.
Australia, German, Alsace, and the last one is German.
How did you know?
I'm too smart. Okay, so color is similar with the number 2.
Yeah.
And on the nose, I got the petrol, and on the palate, high acid lemon as well. And number 4 was my best one.
Your best one, okay. And that's very often true, particularly with high acid wines like this. A little bit of sugar, because it's got the tiniest amount of sweetness there. It was a winemaking decision for me. I wanted to leave just the tiniest little bit of sugar in there, because I had the feeling that with such high acidity, some people would appreciate the sugar. For me, I love it, but I think that number 2 is more complex and more interesting for me.
I know that 2 of those were your wine.
Right.
You made those, right? Could you tell me about your wine?
Sure. So this is my second attempt at making wine. In 2019, I made Pinot Noir in Burgundy from the Appellation Bourgogne Côte d'Or. Then I wanted to do this again. It's a lot of fun for me, and I have a lot of ideas, some good, maybe some not so good. And I wanted to put them into practice, but I want to put my ideas into practice with a winemaker that's really, really on top of his game. So I have a friend who introduced me to Stefan Steinmetz from the winery Weingut Gunther Steinmetz in the Mosel in the town of Brauneberg. So in 2021 I headed off for just about a month to Brauneberg to make wine with Stefan. When I went to Brauneberg, to Weingut Gunther Steinmetz, it's a lot simpler. There's a lot fewer levers to pull with white wine. You wait until the grapes are ripe, you pick them, you bring them into cellar. It's a standard method of operation. There was no cold soaking. You put them in the press, you press them, you separate them from the skins, and fermentation. And when they finished fermenting, then you've got some choices. Do you leave them in stainless steel? What do you do with them? The only choices that we basically had was, where do we put the wines? We ended up putting the wines in the downstairs cellar, which is very, very old, in 100 plus year old barrels, relatively big barrels. And I had a little bit of choice in residual sugar. How much residual sugar that I wanted to go completely dry or a little bit less than dry. One of them, the Alterreben, I selected to go completely dry, and the other one, the Pisporer Goldtropfen, slightly off dry. It would be called dry anyway. It's just when you compare the two, for example, you can see that the one is really bone dry, and that one's got 5 or 6, maybe 4 to 6 grams per liter of acidity, maybe even less. I mean of sugar. Then, when I was racking the wines and tasting the wines in the cellar, I discovered that amongst all the barrels that we had, there were not that many, 10 or 12 barrels, one of the barrels of the Alterreben, so not the Pisporer Goldtropfen, although they're all Mosel wines, but one of the wines that we made from Alterreben, from the town of Veldenz, was somehow or another just a little bit better than the others. Every time I tasted it, it was just a little bit better than the others. In the beginning, I thought I would call it Alteraben Reserve, and in the end, we just bottled it as a single barrel, didn't blend it with the others. That is this one here, the Houston Alteraben. So that is a single barrel, and it's a barrel selection. The sum total of this wine made in the end was, what I have here is like 700 bottles, something like that, a little bit less than 700 bottles. The Pisporter Gold Tropschen is slightly sweeter, and I only have a similar amount here in California of that, but we made considerably more. Gunther Steinmetz is a passionate guy, very, very serious about his wines, and like all smart, passionate people, he is also inquisitive. How do I do this? How do I do that? What's next? He does not only make Riesling, he makes Pinot Noir, Syrah, he makes Chardonnay. He has planted Chenin Blanc in the Mosel. He's always experimenting with various other things and other grapes. I tasted all sorts of things. But his bread and butter is his top Rieslings. When I arrived there in 2021, it looked, just before I arrived, like it was going to be a disaster. That's nothing new in the Mosel. It rained, it was freezing cold, but the time was advancing. And would they get it right? Would the grapes rot? Would they be able to get equipment or even people into the vineyards? Because the vineyards are like this.
It's dangerous.
The vineyards for the Pisporter were based on blue shale, but they're like this. And the vineyards for the Alteraben is more red shale, so slightly darker flavors, also in the Mosel, and also like this. And then the sun came out, dried it out. It stayed cold, but it was a long, extended period, and the winemakers had been fretting about how bad it was going to be, and in the end they're all thrilled with their 2021 because it was a cool, high acid vintage, and in the end, fine, ripe grapes. So basically, when I was in the Mosel, I was living across the road from the winery, the little town of Browneberg, a little apartment. In the mornings, I would wake up early, cross the road to the bakery, buy some rolls or some bread or something like that, take it over to Stefan. The winery is adjacent to their house. Have some bread and butter and coffee with them, and then we would take off to the vineyards. Most usually in this old German four-wheel drive truck of his, a Unimog, freezing cold, with the mist still sitting on the Mosel River. It was a lovely experience. And then I did other things in the afternoon because one doesn't need to sit and watch wine fermenting. And we would get together in the evenings and taste wine. Oh my goodness. Some of the wines we opened, just spectacular. I would say that Stefan is one of the new breed of less well known but seriously up and coming winemakers. The idea is to make dry Riesling at the highest level possible. I hope you enjoy them.
Yeah.
And if you don't worry. I'm enjoying them.
Me too. Let's cheers.
Chin chin.
Cheers.
Chin chin. Prost.
Prost.